I'm in the back.
You're in the back?
I can't hear.
Good morning, everybody.
Good
morning.
Rick.
So, welcome to day 2. I'd like to just take a moment and say how grateful I am that I am given an opportunity to communicate with you about a topic that's very important to me because it is about me. And this is a experience I've had my whole life, and now SIT has given me the skills and language to be able to put this together so that I can communicate with you. Hello. Oh, Jamie. So today we're looking at language as a marker of cultural identity for TCKs, and we'll come to understand what TCKs mean, third culture kids. I'm going to be using a lot of different terms for TCKs, and I hope that you'll become fluent in being able to use these terms as well. The subtitle, or the working hypothesis I have for this presentation is Mode of Pronunciation as an Adaptive Strategy. And we're going to learn a little bit more about that, hopefully. So, let's do some schema building. Thank you, SIT. So, if you take a moment and think about some of these questions, I'm going to have you turn to your partners in a second and try and answer some of these questions, okay? Where am I from? How do I know? Maybe a little more important. Where's my home? Who am I? We only have 45 minutes, so we're trying to figure that out. How can I find out? More importantly, how can I find out? What language do I speak when I'm home? What is my mother tongue? I'll let you figure that one out. And have I consciously made a choice to adapt my language to any larger cultural group? So take just a moment, think about these questions for yourself, and then I invite you to turn to a partner and communicate with each other about the answers that you have to these.
I've got 30 years on it. That I have not.
Crystal eyes?
Yeah. The most interesting question for me is the last one. Because I think we, especially if we're in academic, we have to be careful that the way we speak is so crucial to judge within the first 3 seconds of judging on everything, your appearance, your body, but your speech above all.
Yeah, the minute I walked into your presentation, you never outfit judge. The accent of mainstream America. Whereas I had to adapt, you had to adapt, because we didn't see
Somewhere else.
What do you say? I can see Alex.
Well, thank you.
I was from the South.
Yeah.
I was from the South. It was the first time I started teaching English.
Yeah, I like
The
it.
students come from the city right there. We can't run.
And what is, was it top?
Yeah, and what I mean, go back to class and do that. But
It's a question that deserves.
I mean, I'm sure you told them that they could certainly learn from anybody who can line up for classes to go to university. But I think that was the stereotype. And they didn't know that I had a southern accent. They knew I was from Alabama.
So their judgment is based on the fact that they knew it was from and the association near the South with the stereotype. So it wasn't the language itself.
Well, no, I think they wanted to, you know, they knew it was close enough to the Kennedy. They wanted the Kennedy accent.
Which itself.
So did you choice?
I think it was mostly on that I was pretty good at figuring out how to but also you get some comprehension New York,
More slang. Not the Wall Street and Wall Street. And that was the same thing, I mean, there's such a stereotype of the Southern accent. I found never spoke, you know, what you would have seen on TV when they live far in the South.
So did you have any self-awareness about your...
Well, this is great. Glad you guys have so much to say. Is there anything of any interest, anything that came up that you'd like to share? No?
I didn't hear the question.
Is there anything that came up during your discussion that you feel you'd like to share with the group? Please.
Well, the mythology between, because she's from Hawaii, and I was talking about visiting there, and the mythology of what I thought of Hawaii versus the reality of what I encountered when I got there was very different. So,
Thank you.
And the three of us talked about the regions of the country where we're from. Steve being the more typical American accent from the middle of the country.
Yes.
Alex from New York, and I'm from the South. And the adjustments that the two of us have had to make, whereas Steve has not had to make adjustments.
Tell them about the adjustment that you made.
Tell him about the adjustment.
Oh, what your students
Oh,
said.
yes, yeah, the first time I started teaching ESL, we were doing where are you from, and I said, I'm from Alabama. And they all went running to the director of the program and said, we can't stay in that class because we know that people from Alabama can't speak the English that we need to learn to in person. And that was the end of my career as an ESL.
Thank you. So I created these questions because these are questions, of course, we're very used to being asked, maybe not what is my mother tongue, or have I consciously made a choice to adapt my language to fit in with a larger cultural group. But these are questions that as a TCK, as a third culture kid, I have to ask myself these questions. And for the Sandanona, I've interviewed a number of people that self-identify as TCKs, and when I ask them these questions, specifically like these, these four, there's kind of a knowing laugh. Where are you from? What language do you speak? These are very difficult to answer. And for myself and for other TCKs, this is a lifelong question. And so I wanted you to have a little taste of what it means to be a TCK. Okay? So let's get some definitions down. All right. So I use the term third culture kid interchangeably with now a TCK, which is adult third culture kid. I don't personally want to be called a kid. So a TCK is comfortable. Also now cultural marginal, although that is also now changing because marginal is somewhat negatively charged. Marginal is very close to being marginalized. We don't want to talk about people that are marginalized. So now some of the language is changing to cultural liminal. Liminal meaning it's an anthropological term on the edge or on the edge of culture. We used to be called in-betweeners, between two different cultures, between two different languages. Global nomad, some of us are global nomads, no home ever, For myself, I've never lived longer than 4 years in any one place. Difficult to have cultural roots when you are never stable physically, geographically. So a working definition for third culture kid, it changes depending on who you're speaking to or what articles you're reading, but pretty much it's a person who has spent the formative years, their developmental years, outside of their passport country or outside of the culture of their parents. So for myself, I was raised in Tripoli, Libya, in North Africa, and in Jakarta, Indonesia, to American parents, a father who was from Oklahoma with a very regionally specific Oklahoma accent, and a mother who was from the Valley in California with also her own regionally specific accent. And we spoke English at home, but in school we spoke Arabic, Bahasa Indonesia, and English. So difficult to find a home and a sense of cultural identity when you have to constantly change depending on where you are. Okay? So let's talk about cultural markers. All right. Here's a very nice definition. Difficult maybe to wrap your head around a little bit, but I want to give you some examples of cultural markers that I came up with. One of them is Fish, the band Fish, a Vermont band that I'm very fond of. Fish heads. When I meet a fellow fish head, we could be from different sides of the planet, but when I meet another fish head, the language changes immediately. We use words. Basically, we like quote years and set lists and locations to each other. Oh, were you at SPAC in '99? Oh, that's when they played Camel Walk. Da, da, da. And so there's a whole lexicon that goes along with being a fish head, a fish fan, a fan of this band, Fish. And its own culture, its own language that's used. It is English. From the periphery, you would be able to understand the language that's being used, but you have no idea what they're talking about. The idea, though, is that when I meet a fish head and we start using that language, I feel at home. Yeah. So for you, maybe you're from a rural town in America or from Mauritania, and when you meet somebody and you start talking about, oh, you know, First Street and Main Street, where those meet, there's that restaurant. Oh, Betty's. Oh, I love that place. When I was a kid, I used to have chocolate milkshakes at that place. Ah, there's that sense of familiarity and home. A cultural marker for people that are from an area may be a geographic cultural marker. We can relate to one another based on our memories and shared experience of a geographic place. For the third culture kid, for the cultural marginal, that is a very different experience. We don't have a geographic cultural marker. Yeah? So, this is this is me with one of my students in the school I was at. I just like all the flags. So, the third culture kid will rely on language as a cultural marker, as opposed to a geographic or shared geographic cultural marker. When I meet an international person, I feel right at home when we start using a shared accent, a shared cultural marker. I love this. So here's code switching. Most of us are very familiar with code switching. I'm using this example because it is Singlish, Singapore English. This is my future context. I thought this was very interesting. When I was a little kid, I had a number of Filipino friends. And I was always so impressed with the way, within the context of one sentence, they could go between Tagalog and English seamlessly. And it sounded so cool. And it was a shared language, a shared cultural experience with people that were from the Philippines. And I always thought how great this is. And here is Singapore, or Singlish, with Tamil and Mandarin and Cantonese. Interesting that the English is always an et. I would think that those are more difficult to use, but so here's code switching. Just a little reminder, a little refresher about code switching. Okay. Now we come to unconscious and conscious code switching. This is from a young gentleman, Mr. Lau, Jason Lau or Justin Lau? Justin Lau, out of Singapore. And I was reading his a shared experience that he had about speaking English at home, Singlish, and his parents urging him to lose Singlish because it's considered a substandard language. The way that Singaporeans perceive their English is it's substandard, their choice of the word substandard. And the idea that there is this English that is above them and outside of their reach, British English or standard American English. And this young gentleman, Justin Lau, is sent to an international school in Tokyo, Japan, where he learns this blended standard American accent. And it gives him authority and power. When he comes back to Singapore, he has his 2 years of military service. You have to serve for 2 years in Singapore, his mandated service. And immediately he realizes that the people in power, the sergeant, the drill sergeant, speaks to him very differently than the drill sergeant speaks to the rest of the recruits because of his now standard American accent. It's given him some authority. But Justin makes conscious decisions to switch between Singlish and standard English. When he's at home, if he speaks in standard English, his parents ridicule him for being too good. In the street, if he uses standard English, he's treated differently. So he makes sometimes conscious decision and sometimes an unconscious decision. Sometimes it just happens where he doesn't realize that he's switching. And for myself, it's the same story. When I speak to my mother, we have a certain language that we speak. When I speak to my father, there's a shift. When I speak to my younger brothers and sisters, those of us who are raised together overseas, after a little while, our language changes. That might be an unconscious choice, where we start switching our language. And when I speak to my older brothers and sisters, again, a switch. Sometimes conscious, sometimes unconscious. It becomes very difficult, I think, for cultural marginals to find who they are in relation to their language. Okay. Oh my God, here we go. Here we go. This is a working hypothesis. We have two terms from different schools, mode of pronunciation and adaptive strategy. So mode of pronunciation, I'm using mode, where's this little mark? I'm using mode as like a second tier definition, mode in terms of the musicality, diatonic scales, the style or the fashion of pronunciation, and adaptive strategy. Okay? An adaptive strategy is a anthropological term that describes a culture when it moves. A simple example is when a culture moves from a hunter-gatherer to agrarian to pre-industrial, industrial, post-industrial, and so on. It's an adaptive strategy. Okay, a movement. Now I have mode. I love this picture. Mode of pronunciation. So this is a patterned arrangement. I think about diatonic scales, the style, the fashion, the sound of pronunciation. So here is, please be patient. And if this doesn't work, I want to find out why. So please help me. So fancy. So here's the working hypothesis. The cultural marginal uses a blended accent as a mode of pronunciation, as part of an adaptive strategy that is part of sometimes conscious, sometimes unconscious choice, using language as a cultural marker to adapt to others' cultures. Very wordy, but what it means is that there is a conscious and sometimes unconscious choice for a third culture kid or a cultural marginal to use a blended accent to fit in with different cultural groups. That's all. Okay, so let's watch two little clips. The first one is Welcome to My Life. This is beautiful. This is a young Korean girl born and raised in Chile. Korean parents, raised speaking Spanish, and then at the age of 18, she relocates to South Korea to attend university. And there's a great little stop motion film that kind of shows her little experience. And the second video is multilingualism in the third culture kid. So what's important with this second video that I'll show you is that these students, you will hear probably a standard blended American accent. But the students that you're watching, this is the first time they've been in the United States. And they're attending Georgetown University in DC.
I grew up in a yellow country, but my parents are blue. I'm blue. Or at least, that is what they told me. But I play with the yellows. I went to school with the yellows. I spoke the yellow language. I even dressed and appeared to be yellow. Then I moved to the blue land. Now I go to school with the blues. I speak the blue language. I even dress and look blue. But deep down inside me, something's yellow. I love the blue country, but my ways are tinted with yellow. When I am in the blue land, I want to be yellow. When I am in the yellow land, I want to be blue. Why can't I be both? A place where I can be me. A place where I can be green. I just want to be green.
Yes, and I mean, it's particularly hard for them when someone says, well, where are you from? They don't really feel they have a sense of identity, because if they have lived in 4 or 5 different countries, then it can be quite confusing. And the girl says, look, my tongue does not have a mother. There isn't such a thing as a mother, because she's lived in so many countries. And she also said, before I knew how to walk, I already knew how to fly.
Okay. So now remember, with this video, the people, of course, we're going to look and see how they're going to look like, so we already have a perception of who they are. When you hear their accents, you'll have a perception of who they are in relation to their language. But remember, this is the first time that these students have been in the United States, okay?
Well, it was really hard to go to school with all these like French kids and then be like, oh, like, why do you have a funny accent? Why do your parents have funny accents? Especially when you're little, you want to be able to define who you are.
Where are you from? Are you from Japan? Are you half Japanese? No, I'm not half Japanese, but I live there and I sort of speak it. And my mom speaks it, but she's not Japanese. She's actually Korean.
When my family gets together, we always have this like kind of crazy combination of languages.
But I still remember during my some kind of summer orientation, I went to school and the kids like, oh, you're from Singapore. I was like, yeah. I was like, wow, your English is so good. I was just like,
since I spent so much time in both worlds, the accents, I mean, I don't really have an accent in either language, so people are very surprised when I say that, oh my God, you're French, or what, you're American, you have a perfect French accent.
I had a Korean American friend visit once, and it was just me, my mom, and this Korean American friend. And we're all having conversations switching between Korean American really easily, and Korean and English really easily. And then my mom and I will suddenly switch into Japanese without even realizing. And it happens all the time when we're together, but we kind of forget that we have to limit ourselves around other people. And so my friend was just sitting there for like a good 5 minutes, kind of chuckling nervously and going, I don't know what's happening.
And I went to school with people from Azerbaijan to Brazil to...
Okay. Oh no. Awesome. Oh no. This is what Chad and I were talking about. What happens when technology fails? Oh, just like that. Welcome back. Thank you. Okay, so why is this important? It could just be, well, it sounds like a regular accent to me. Why is this important? And, come on. Okay, so what's important for me is that this is an experience that I've had my whole life and never a language to talk about it. When I am around international students, there is this wonderful familiarity. I feel like I'm home. My ears can hear maybe a non-native accent or a blended accent, usually one that we've learned in international schools. Here's Justin again. I love this. So here's our blended accent. International school accents give their students, this is international school students, a sense of belonging and not in a otherwise culturally disparate environment. International students relate to each other through identifying with each other's language and eventually settle on a culture that is typified by their education. This can be spotted in their telltale international accent, a blended accent. Okay, so when I meet somebody and they have this blended accent, I feel at home. That's a cultural marker for me. It's as if we're talking about the ice cream parlor that's down the street where we used to go to when we were children. I was teaching in Jakarta, and there was a young teacher there named Wiwit. And at the end of class, we would sit outside and we would share a smoke. And he's a Javanese, beautiful Javanese man, and he spoke exactly like I did. And it sounded so regionally specific that I said, are you from San Luis Obispo, California? Nope. Like, oh, are you from LA? No, I'm not from California. So, okay. Are you Ohio? Are you from Ohio? No, I'm not from the States. Oh, I said, but you're English. And I'm like, your parents obviously speak English. Very often, American mom or American father. American mom? Nope. My parents don't speak English. We don't speak English at home. Well, how did you learn this incredible English with this very specific blended accent? International school. He had never lived in an English-speaking country. He had never left Indonesia. He was an English teacher, and he spoke with this beautiful blended accent. And I feel immediately at home. This is a brother with a shared experience. Yeah. I love this. This is a young woman. She is, her family is from India, and she was raised in Hong Kong, perfect English. And when she's at home, the parents, again, ridicule her for speaking with this elevated speech. In India, she's not Indian. In Hong Kong, she's not from Hong Kong. In Georgetown, she's not from America. No home. This is very funny. This is a shared experience. At the summer breaks or winter breaks, you go back to the passport country. You're speaking with your friends there. You go back. You switch back to the accent, the shared accent of your friends. And then when it's time to go back to school, you go back to school. For the first couple of days, you become very conscious of the words that you use, very conscious of the language you use, the accent that you use, and very slowly you have to realign yourself to the larger cultural group in terms of your language, in terms of the accent. Okay, so another shared experience. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit. I love this picture. Let me stop really quick. Are we okay? Are there any questions so far before we move into the discussion? Anything that needs clarification? Alex?
Blended accent?
Yes.
So is that a marker of having attended an international school in any of a number of countries? And what's being blended?
I think in my experience, when you look at international schools, who's teaching at the international schools? But Americans, maybe Canadians, maybe Australians, maybe British. Usually British schools are specifically British schools. So the accent that you learn, if you're not speaking English at home, and you're not speaking English in the street, then the English that you learn is from your instructors at the international school. So you adapt to that accent because maybe that's the academic accent. And for me, I identify it as a blended accent or international school accent. Blended accent's a little better. What's being blended, I think, is my teacher Steve is from Ohio, my teacher Alex is from New York, my teacher Elizabeth is from the rural South, and my ears, I'm trying to adapt my language to fit into each one of these. So I take an A from Elizabeth, an E from Alex, the way I pronounce my CKs or my THs from Steve. That's what becomes blended. And in my experience, when I'm with international students or international school students, even my students back in Idlewild in Southern California, I hear them adapting their accent to fit into whatever situation they're in. It's not specifically register. I mean, we adapt register depending on who we speak to, but I think the blended accent is this evolving, coming into itself accent. Yeah?
Thank you.
Okay? All right, so let's talk. What's so small? Shall I read it? Can you see? It's kind of small, huh? I have to get close because I'm blind too. To what extent do you believe it's possible for groups of people to retain their cultural identity when they are removed from their homeland, this is passport country, or land of your parents, or they lose the use of their mother tongue? And have you had any personal experience of negative attitudes towards non-native Englishes, whether directly or as an observer? Do you agree or disagree that it is essential to retain one's own cultural identity in order to become a self-confident member of a larger cultural group? I ask this because it's based off of Janet Bennett's article on cultural marginality, and she says for a TCK to become self-confident, to actualize themselves, they have to identify with a culture. That's her idea, that I have to find a culture and say that is who I am. But as a third culture kid, I'm on the peripheral of many cultures. If I say I'm from California, I'm not from California. If I say I'm from Indonesia, I'm not from Indonesia. So how do I find a culture? Okay. So is it essential to retain one's own cultural identity in order to become a self-confident member of a larger cultural group? And the last question, how do you see language being linked to one's culture and ethnic identity? What happens to a person who has been torn from their mother tongue or from their cultural community? So if you like, you can choose one, or maybe you see some similarities between some of the questions. If you want to just talk, you can talk with your peers and we can share.
Do you have a Well, I think the first one. I can't tell. They have had a language shift to there's no one here talking.
College lived here for 9 years. Most of I don't see myself.
But at the time,
I'm just thinking about Nick's population of internship students in polys who were in Bhutan, and they weren't Bhutanese enough, so they speak Nepali in Nepal, Nepali, and they come to the US.
And then their language has no merit or weight here.
You're right, and so it's a language not recognized by any places where they've been. And so is that somehow hindering their cultural identity to have this language? It's not as common, their nationality was not of Nepal, so it's almost the opposite. The question is their language prevents them from having a cultural identity. Because one that they naturally belong to Nepal, so it's not Nepal.
And they can't go back to the language.
Bhutanese, criteria it's all the origin.
mostly, yeah. But
Moved
just
from your accent is the truth of all origins. Therefore,
In the United States,
Oh, that's really one reason they have to leave.
That's right.
Yeah.
even though, unless somebody finds a reason why we
Yet they haven't realized what you learn. You ask them about their homes and
a lot of it is
describe it as a product. It's not like they're absent of culture. It's just
And I think what's important about that is when these are older people as well, they've lived and they come to to New England, and that experience that they have, it has no value here. You know, when I'm asking my students about, tell me about the elephants in Bhutan, and they have this very real reaction. Oh, no, elephants are terrible. They're destructive. They come in and they wipe out the banana trees and they eat all our crops. They have this very severe reaction. At the same time, the Congolese have the opposite reaction. Elephants are to be celebrated. It's a symbol. It's a commodity. But then you're in Concord, New Hampshire. That experience has no weight. Maybe the larger population that's not. Oh, it's a fun story. It's an anecdote, but it doesn't speak to their experience. So suddenly they're caught. Well, all these years I've had this experience. I've had this linguistic experience, and it has nothing to do with where I am now. Who am I? It always comes back to this, who am I now? If you're comfortable, that's what Ben has talked about when I moved from being an encapsulated marginal into owning culture regardless of where I am. Now I'm a realized human being, but I think that takes a lot of work and a lot of support.
And also it has to be power, like whatever your language is you're bringing in or whatever the power is, where you're going. So the Bhutanese have no power. They have no power at all. That
the funny thing is that I time I was those other situations.
How about as teachers? Question number 2. Have you seen, as maybe an observer, or maybe, well, probably as an observer, as a teacher, have you experienced a certain register that people use with non-native Englishes? I think about our ESL students in our class and how we may unconsciously treat them because we're recognizing a non-native English speaker. So we maybe try and simplify our language or speak too slow or
Like teacher talk.
teacher talk.
Is that question number 2?
Yes, so it is.
Negative experiences towards non-native English.
Yeah, because it defined as a negative attitude towards an ESL student.
I see that speaking in such a way carries with it a negative attitude.
Yeah,
More sympathetic,
so.
more sympathetic attitude. It's not condescending so much as it is just linguistically adjusting. I don't know, does that address the question?
Let's talk about it.
It's a phenomenon that I've read about and experienced where non-natives of any language often have a sense of greater confidence and ease when there was other non-natives speaking that target language because of this shared status. But with native speakers feel more self-conscious, less accomplished, less proficient, less self-confident.
There's a very kind of horizontal relationship. Like when I was learning Korean, I had people from Mongolia, China, all different countries in the class. Like there was no judgment really of something as pronunciation.